Okay, let's get into the trimming. You notice that I have exaggerated. The more experience you get, the closer the amount of fabric you'll get when you initially cut it. But I recommend for students, don't undercut in the beginning. Allow yourself a little bit more so you get proficient. You're more interested in the sewing and the technique. And once you've mastered that, then you can start to cut down the fabric so you don't have quite as much. I almost have an inch on this side and 3/4. I might have a quarter on each side beyond that, or 3/8 or a half or whatever. I wouldn't spend so much time being perfect when you're cutting out your fabric for your interfacings for the fusing or non-fusible. You can always trim it away. It doesn't save you that much money, believe me from experience. But here we have a square, and there are no seam allowances on this one here. And basically what I do is I always use weights. I have some kind of weight on there. And because I don't have any seam allowances, I must allow a 1/4 inch of fabric on each side. On the top, I will allow a 1/4 inch also. Pretty cut and dry. You don't have to be perfect. It's all inside, and it depends on the thickness of your interfacing, what I'm going to show you now. Now, normally, a shirt maker actually would do this at the sewing machine table. But and when they would fold it on the crosshairs here, because you don't have any bulk, there's no interfacing there. And you would fold it right on the cross stitch, and you would put your index finger in there and turn it inside out. And usually shirt makers have a point turner. It's pretty good quality. I don't even remember where I got these. I have several, but the ones they make today are really truly plastic. And with this point turner, you can create square points. Now, I'll do the same on the other side. Now, let's pretend that we're at the sewing machine. This is how really master shirt makers would work. In the beginning, you can do another technique that I'll be showing you shortly here, but again, it's just turning it. And again, using your point turner. And they would have a point turner at the machine. And then what they normally do, shirt makers, when I first had a mentor, this thumbnail was about this long. And you can imagine my first day with him. In those days, we weren't paid to be a protege. So what they would do is use this nail that was about 1/2 inch long beyond there and open the seams. That's what they would do. Open the seams. They would go up here and they would open the seams. Just press them open with the finger. And the middle one. And again, they would just press them. This is how shirt makers would save time. You do this at the machine, okay? And then you can see the seams are always favored to the wrong side. And you can see I haven't done anything. And then they would obviously start and do your top stitching and complete it at that stage. Once it is top stitched, then let me see if I can find another sample here. Well, I don't have the sample, or yes, I do. Once the sample is done, then they would trim the seam allowances, just like you see here. Now, how do they do that? Believe it or not, shirt makers have measurements in their eyes. We know what a 1/4 inch, and we know what 3/8, and we know what a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to show you one method here of a 1/4 inch. You get this embedded in your eyeballs without wasting time. That's one method. And the other method would be is to grab your see-through ruler and measure off a 1/4 inch, and then just do a water soluble line and cut. So there again, you can test them. You know, the things I'm telling you from experience. I'm telling you from observation from 50 years ago when I first started out as a young man, 20 years old, and learning all these techniques. And this is what makes you efficient. You can see that in this one here, I just finger pressed it. Now, let me do a round. I'll do a round this time. I'll do a 1/4 inch again. This one here has no seams. So 1/4 inch. And I usually do, it depends. Now this is going to depend on how thick the interfacing is. Now, if your interfacing is, this is a medium weight, lightweight would be the same technique I'm going to show you here. But if it's heavy, if it's real heavy, I probably would trim within 1/8 of an inch, but make sure it's round. And just turn it. You notice how I turn with my left hand, okay? And I would come just a little closer. So, and let's just say that we're turning it. This time I'm not going to use the finger method. I'm going to turn it. And I'll use the spray method. I'll spray it along the edges. And then what I'll do is I'll start favoring the seams to the wrong side. You can see the seams. And I'll get my iron. And I would go ahead and iron it. Go to the other side, do the same thing. Now, I could use my point turner also to, you know, get it smooth in the beginning. In this particular case, I've done such a good job that I don't really need it. But here we go. I'm favoring it to the wrong side. And the other reason that I don't like doing the original technique on the machine is because I'm always ironing. I've had customers that are 30 years with me. They like my work, they like the precision, they like the fact that they don't bubble or wrinkle because I spend time ironing all the time. Yes, it is a little bit more work. Shirt makers would laugh and say, why are you doing that? But it's been my success. And again, I would go ahead and favor them to the wrong side. Always ironing, always ironing. Look at the right side. And again, iron it, and they come out beautiful. And of course you do your top stitching. Then I'll show you the other method that I was just talking about. In case you didn't get it, I would get my water soluble and I would mark it. Now you can do all this. If you've got 10 sets of cuffs, you can all do it. Now this one here is wet. That's why it's not showing for the water soluble. Let me heat it up a little bit. Okay. Again, I'd mark my 1/4 inch. And then you have a line now. Now if you want to be more accurate, you can follow that line. Okay, and of course you top stitch it and you're ready to go. Let's do another one. This one here is a 1/4 inch. Now I would suggest, and I forgot to tell you this, but when you're in the last step of finishing, before you stitch them, make sure that they're the same on both sides. You know, after you've trimmed them, make sure that they're the same width. So if you put your ruler on it, this one's 3 1/4, and this one's a little bit bigger, you see. So 3 1/4, and I'm showing you this because they'll be off a little bit. So what I should have done is when I was in initial stitches, I would have came over here. I would have picked one, let's say it's from the edge, from the finished edge. Let's say we come over 1.5, and we come over 1.5, and I would measure 3 1/4 because that's what he wants. So 3 1/4 is here, okay, and 3 1/4 is here. 3 1/4 is here, okay. That's the finished measurement. So that means that the seam would have to be here. Well, your finished cut would be here. That's okay. So this one here should be 1/4 here. Yeah, this one's okay, but this one's off a little bit. And so what I'd recommend that you do is you unstitch it and come around. And that's why it's very, very important that when you cut them, that you measure them and make sure that they're the same. And this one here, you can see, is off a tad. And you recut them. And again, you would measure whatever this is going to be. Let's say this is 3 1/4. And this is what I didn't show you initially when I was stitching it. So make sure that when you cut your interfacing that you verify everything. Because believe it or not, a little 1/8 or even 3/6, 1/4, it can be off sometimes, especially when you're in a rush. So double check them, because as I always say, good pattern making is good sewing, and get in the habit of verifying everything. So again, we finished with a round. Let's get into the angles, because this one might, I'll show you another. Now, there's 2 methods here on the angle. Again, we'll do the 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you can, I like this method without the seams because it doesn't create any bulk. If you have thin interfacing or medium weight, a lot of times you can just add the seams if you want, but I like using the template, especially on anything other than in a rectangle. I like using the no seams. Now, let me just show you here. You can see the angle on it, and here we go. Let's turn it on the thread, and I'll show you. There's no bulk because there's no interfacing. Okay, that's one part of it. What's the other part? You see? Now there was no trimming at all, but sometimes when you use the method that has seam allowance, let me trim it when there's seam allowances included in the interfacing, as in this one here. I'll show you a different technique, especially if it's real thick interfacing like cardboard, which some men prefer. So sometimes when they're real thick, what I'll do is create a V-cut into an 1/8 to avoid some of that stuff. And let me do the same on this side here. And then I'll do the same procedure. And then, of course, when you press it open, it pretty well lay down pretty well. Now, this has seam allowances. You see the bulk? There's a big difference between this one and the other. It doesn't have any seams. That's why I prefer it. To me, it has a little tendency for a little cleaner look, and that's why I use it. I would recommend that you try both methods so you see visually what I'm talking about and get a feel for it. And that's about it. There's no magic to it. There's a couple of techniques I showed you. Try them, get a feel for it, and let's continue with the next segment.